It was supposed to be a routine press briefing, a space where seasoned political figures reaffirmed their narratives and asserted dominance over younger voices trying to break into the arena. Chuck Schumer, ever confident and known for his biting remarks, used the opportunity to mock Karoline Leavitt, a rising conservative voice. With a condescending grin, he questioned her experience, her policy understanding, and even suggested that her platform was more style than substance. The media chuckled, some members of his party smiled smugly, and for a moment, it seemed the message was clear: Leavitt didn't belong in the big leagues. But as the cameras rolled and the murmurs subsided, Karoline stepped forward, not with rebuttal anger, but with a poised calm that caught the room off guard. She thanked Schumer for his remarks and began laying out her message. What followed wasn't a defense. It was a thorough, relentless, data-backed dismantling of not only the senior senator's recent positions but also of the very framework of dismissive establishment politics that had grown comfortable in its unchecked authority. Karoline started her statement not by retaliating with personal insults but by highlighting the importance of intergenerational discourse in politics. She emphasized that mocking youth isn't a substitute for policy discussion and that the future requires serious collaboration, not sarcasm. Then, methodically, she presented evidence of policy breakdowns under Schumer's leadership, from record inflation and mismanaged budgets to broken promises on student loan reform and inadequate responses to national security threats. She unfolded a list of failures that were impossible to ignore. She read figures from the Congressional Budget Office, referenced bipartisan watchdog reports, and pointed to press releases where Schumer contradicted his past statements. The room, once light with laughter, grew intensely quiet. Media representatives leaned in closer. Even those who had smiled moments before now avoided eye contact. Her presence, amplified by facts and a calm resolve, began shifting the entire tone of the briefing. She wasn't there to be underestimated. She was there to challenge the narrative entirely. And then came the unexpected moment. Karoline pulled out a stack of printed documents, emails, committee notes, and campaign finance reports highlighting how specific bills backed by Schumer directly benefited donors tied to pharmaceutical and energy lobbying groups. She didn't accuse vaguely, she named specific PACs, outlined voting timelines, and even referenced earlier speeches where Schumer claimed he was fighting for the people. But the numbers told a different story. Billions in subsidies had gone to corporations that later hosted fundraisers for him. These weren't allegations, they were timelines, verified and publicly traceable. Her voice remained calm, even empathetic, but the implications of what she was exposing could not be understated. She spoke not to destroy Schumer personally but to awaken the public to a pattern. Accountability, she said, should not be selective or performative. Schumer's face, visible behind her, reflected a shift from amusement to discomfort. What was meant to be a verbal slapdown of a young politician had transformed into a public examination of establishment decay. Without stopping for applause or reaction, Karoline pivoted to energy policy. She discussed how reliance on foreign sources had grown under Schumer's oversight and exposed internal contradictions in his stance on domestic drilling and renewable subsidies. She played a short clip on her phone, letting the audio of a private donor meeting where Schumer reassured oil executives of stable returns echo briefly in the room. The same Schumer who had publicly denounced fossil fuel dependency just weeks later. The silence was piercing. Her message wasn't that political compromise is barred but that deliberate deception while claiming moral superiority is unacceptable. She offered alternative bills that had been sidelined, not by public vote, but by internal committee manipulation. She urged transparency, suggesting all Senate negotiations be digitally archived for public access. It was a bold ask, but the logic was undeniable. The media was no longer simply reporting a clash, they were witnessing a shift in who held the moral and intellectual high ground. Karoline then addressed education. She pointed out that despite promises for student debt reform, most working-class students still bore the same burdens as years prior. She pulled from Department of Education statistics, showing how income-driven repayment plans were underutilized because of bureaucratic hurdles that Schumer's supported legislation had failed to fix. She read testimonials from students who had been promised relief but had seen only delays. These weren't isolated issues, they were systemic and prolonged by political hesitation. Schumer's image as a protector of students wavered as Karoline presented case after case where proposed fixes were ignored in favor of headline-grabbing but ineffective proposals. She proposed detailed plans for simplifying debt relief applications, increasing grants for vocational training, and reducing interest rates through competitive refinancing options. It wasn't just criticism, it was vision. The very thing Schumer had mocked her for lacking, she displayed in full. With clarity, conviction, and concrete steps, she redefined what youth in politics could offer. She then brought up national security and the southern border, linking rising threats and trafficking cases to lax enforcement policies and legislative gridlock. She cited bipartisan reports, indicating record levels of illicit entry, and detailed how recent appropriations under Schumer's guidance failed to support key border technologies. More importantly, she spoke about how these failures weren't just about numbers, so they affected real families, communities, and law enforcement. She showed a chart of rising fentanyl deaths correlated with cross-border transport gaps and proposed stronger funding for detection, rehabilitation, and international cooperation. Her tone remained professional, but the gravity of her content was undeniable. She wasn't fear-mongering, she was exposing. And the picture she painted made prior jokes seem dangerously detached from reality. Again, she didn't just criticize, she laid out viable alternatives. Bipartisan-sponsored bills that were killed in committee for not aligning with donor priorities. It was becoming impossible to frame her as inexperienced. She was speaking with more preparation than some senators did in a year. In a move that surprised even her closest aides, Karoline issued a direct challenge to Schumer and other senior leaders to agree to an open town hall moderated by both left and right-leaning journalists, with no pre-approved questions. Let the public ask what they truly want to know. It was bold, maybe even risky, but it resonated. In a world of scripted debates and filtered sound bites, the idea of raw accountability was refreshing. Social media lit up instantly. Trending hashtags called on Schumer to accept the challenge. His silence was deafening. Karoline continued without pause, calling for generational renewal, not in age, but in mindset. She made it clear that America doesn't need influencers, so it needs informed, principled voices. And while she may be young, she was clearly more informed than many who doubted her. The press room didn't clap, they couldn't. But they stared, tweeted, recorded. The power dynamic had flipped. She was no longer reacting to Schumer's insult, she had become the defining voice of the day. As the press conference concluded, fact-checkers immediately began verifying the claims Karoline had made. To their surprise, and Schumer's concern, everything checked out. The documents were authentic. The timelines matched. The financial records were accurate. Ethics committees issued quiet statements of concerned review. Schumer's office released a non-committal response promising transparency while offering no rebuttal. Meanwhile, independent analysts began to comment on how Leavitt's presentation might spark a movement within the conservative base, attracting not just hardliners but independents and young voters who craved straightforwardness. Her clip went viral, not because it was flashy or aggressive, but because it cut through noise with clarity. Even liberal commentators admitted she came prepared and landed factual blows. What was supposed to be her embarrassment had become her moment. And in the world of politics, moments like these don't just define days, they define careers. For Schumer, it was a misstep. For Karoline, it was a statement. She's not just here to participate here, she's here to lead. By the following week, Karoline's speech had been viewed millions of times, not just by supporters, but by skeptics who admitted she made them think. Editorials across the political spectrum debated her points, but none could deny her command of the facts. Young Americans, often disengaged from political discourse, found in her a rare combination of reason, courage, and articulation. Her campaign received a surge of donations. Interviews were requested by national and international media. Schumer, on the other hand, faced questions he wasn't prepared to answer. What began as a mockery ended with a movement. Karoline didn't just survive the attack, she reversed it, flipping public sentiment, redefining expectations, and proving that new voices aren't just rising, they're roaring. Her bombshell wasn't just a single fact or document. It was the accumulation of truth, timing, and talent. And it left Schumer and anyone watching shaken.